President Buhari vows to sustain the unity of Nigeria.
Anybody to try to joke with the unity of this country, he has a problem as long as we are alive.
Senate approves INEC budget for 2019 elections.
Nigeria presents economic recovery and growth plan to world's economic managers in Bali, Indonesia.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall take a look at threats of and response to natural and man-made disasters in Nigeria.
Nigeria has had its fair share of natural disasters such as drought, oil spill, bushfire, landslides, among many others.
Now, experts believe that Nigeria is nevertheless one of the few lucky countries not buffeted by natural disasters of the magnitude often seen in other parts of the world.
You're right, Kingsley. Nevertheless, flooding is one of the most devastating problem in Nigeria right now, which, as you all know, has claimed many lives and caused severe damage. Many still remember the devastating floods in Nigeria, which happened in 2012 when many people lost their lives and property worth billions of naira.
That's right, Joy. And while the current floods are also wreaking havoc across several states, many persons, of course, have been displaced and properties worth several billions of naira have been destroyed. But there are also threats such as the earth tremor in Abuja, which drew quite some anxiety. And of course, before then, the earth tremors also in Kaduna. But the Abuja incident has been explained away by the authorities.
That's right, Kingsley. Apart from this, we also had cases of gas explosions in Nasarawa State, petrol tanker explosion in Lagos, lead poisoning in Zamfara, and many other disasters that have claimed lives and properties.
So one big question to ask is, what is the state of preparedness of the various institutions with regard to coping with the fallout of disasters, whether natural or man-made? And to what extent have previous experiences in coping with disasters impacted on current levels of preparedness?
Pertinent questions, Kingsley. Remember that there are warnings in some cases from relevant agencies. But the question again, these warnings, have they been heeded to, and have they helped in averting the anticipated challenges? That is a whole lot of issue sitting on its own.
Precisely, Joy, and that's the reason why we are focusing attention on it today. And when we are asking the question about the level of preparedness, we're also looking at how first responders often will cope with disasters when they occur. What is the state of the local government? What is the state of the states with regard to their coping with disasters whenever they occur? And then how do we treat persons who are displaced by disasters? So that's our focus in our conversation segment on Good Morning Nigeria today, and I'd like to welcome you to the program, being broadcast as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. My name is Kingsley Usadolo.
And I am Joy Usiagu, joining Kingsley to welcome you to today's edition of the program, coming to you live from the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. As usual, we shall present our companion segments, which include newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and of course, entertainment news. But first, let's take the morning news with Musbao Danwahab. Hello, Musbao.
Yeah, good morning, Joy, and good morning, Kingsley. Welcome to the news. President Muhammadu Buhari has vowed to do whatever it takes within his powers towards ensuring that the unity of Nigerians remains sacrosanct. The president stated this while granting audience to the Ofo of Umofo Kingdom in Imo State, Eze Abdul Fattah Chimeze Emetuma, on a goodwill visit.
I'm very pleased that you identified with this patriotism and nationalism, and I assure you that this administration will do its best at all times to make sure that your objectives are understood and as much as possible made our own contribution to meet them. Anybody to try to joke with the unity of this country, he has a problem as long as we are alive.
Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has declared open a two-day National Energy and Climate Change Summit in Abuja. The summit is aimed at improving the investment climate in the energy sector to be able to attract both domestic and foreign investments.
Our energy and energy-related policies are not only geared towards energy supply security, but also to mitigate global warming.
To succeed in limiting global warming, the world urgently needs to use energy efficiently, while embracing clean energy sources to make things move, heat up, and cool down.
Meanwhile, Nigeria is once again telling the investors to key into the economic recovery and growth plan. ERGP, as global economic managers converge on Bali to brainstorm on how to grow the global economy. Minister of Budget and National Planning, Udoma Udoma, who was on the Africa Regional Economic Outlook panel, says Nigeria's developments have a significant effect over the whole sub-Saharan Africa.
More investment-friendly place, a more attractive place for people to do business. One of the initiatives that we did, we conducted sector-specific labs that we refer to as the ERGP Focus Labs, in which we brought potential investors and government officials together to seek to remove the bottlenecks and impediments impeding investment projects.
Back home, the Senate has passed the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) appropriation bill for the 2018 fiscal year. The sum of 234.5 billion naira was approved, out of which 189 billion is for the conduct of the 2019 general elections.
Totaling 189 billion and 7,272,303 naira be approved as part of the development of 2018 budget.
I'd like to suggest respectfully that both this report and the report of the request of the Security Agency be consolidated into one report so that we'll have a single report next week. The INEC budget should be separate with that of the Security Agency.
In the lower chamber, the House of Representatives has expressed support to the involvement of the Nigerian army in ongoing investigations to unravel the circumstances that led to the missing of a retired army general in Plateau State. This followed an amendment to cause by Representative Edward Wajok that such investigations be carried out by the place being the institution vested with that responsibility.
Urges the army to desist immediately from entering into houses without search warrants or the indiscriminate arrest of law-abiding citizens.
And we all know that the community came out and protested that a particular fund must not be searched, to the extent that women went naked. In the process of searching that fund, his car was found inside the fund.
Away from the National Assembly, as the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, continues its intervention in the 7 states under national disaster, the agency has again declared national disaster in 3 more states. They are Taraba, Adamawa, and Kebbi. Director General of NEMA, Mustafa Mahaja, who stated this when he convened an emergency stakeholders meeting, explained that the level of devastation requires urgent intervention.
To respond to the disaster, the needs of the people, the affected people, those really in need, and then provide their needs, and also thinking about if we can provide some basic shelters now, it will prevent them, particularly those in the villages, prevent them from going back to where they were. Some of the things we are trying to quickly do, something that can reduce the possible consequences of the next year's disaster if it should happen.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has appealed to the media to be abreast of rules guiding the practice of advertising in Nigeria. At a political advertising stakeholders forum in Abuja, the minister said that media houses must avoid hateful advertisements by submitting every political advert for advertising standards panel for vetting and approval.
Speeches in the media. So we decided that we need to curb it against the 2019 election.
Desperate politicians will likely use the opportunity of the elections to plan and separate malicious political advertisements. We need to be on guard.
The All Progressives Congress, APC, says the opposition People's Democratic Party, PDP, cannot avoid corruption integrity test for candidates ahead of the 2019 elections. The party, in a statement by its acting National Publicity Secretary, Yakini Nabina, alleged that the spokesperson for the People's Democratic Party, Kola Ologbodiyan, in a statement accused some senior officials of the APC-led administration of deliberate effort to impugn on the character of the PDP presidential candidate, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. The party, in the statement, insists that PDP cannot be simplistic and attempt to wish away the issue of a candidate seeking elections into positions at all levels, particularly as 2019 approaches. APC insists on its position that the Nigerian electorate must have the opportunity to choose from candidates that can pass the integrity test. The party believed that character of office holders into public offices is important as the progress and development of a country depends on it. As Nigeria prepares for general election, the Association of Local Governments of Nigeria, ALGON, has called on state government to support the autonomy for local governments to deepen democracy at the grassroots. The appeal was made during the association's national executive meeting in Abuja, where the members again raised issues ranging from autonomy of local governments, security, and the just concluded primary elections.
Soliciting the local government or the state houses of assembly passing the autonomy bill so that local government will have their own autonomy.
The governors are meeting, the chairmen are meeting, the security apparatus are on their toes, ensuring that there is peace.
That's the news highlight for now. Good morning, Nigeria. We'll be back with Joy and Kingsley, but that's after the break. Have a very good morning.
Thanks for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria. For some business news now, tax experts applaud federal government's initiative in tightening regulations against money laundering and tax evasion in a new Executive Order number 8. For these and more, let's join Chimobi Walter Naji on the business desk.
Reactions have continued to trail the federal government's Executive Order number 8, tagged Voluntary Offshore Asset Regularization Scheme. Some tax experts have applauded the initiative by the federal government, describing it as a step in the right direction, which will further improve the country's revenue base and create transparency in the asset base of Nigerians in diaspora.
I believe that there must be some guidelines on how people can comply with the scheme, because there's no clear guideline for now, and I also discovered that an office has been set up in Switzerland that would help in recovering those funds, but the procedure for recovering those funds must be clearly outlined.
In another story, about 14 days after the Ghana government gave a directive for the reopening of shops owned by Nigerian traders in Ghana, businesses are still crippled in Kumasi, Ghana, as the traders cannot gain access to their shops, a situation some stakeholders have described as detrimental to the growing trade relations among African countries within the ECOWAS region and against the ECOWAS Treaty.
This is getting to 3 months. Shops locked, business closed. Those who have warehouses closed. But there's a new dimension to this, which is quite saddening, too unfortunate. And this is the xenophobic dimension. Our traders in Ghana are being attacked on a daily basis.
And as leaders, what we have done, and by the grace of God, we have achieved have been that to calm our people down. We don't want them to fight anybody. And we're also taking it easy so that Ghanaians in Nigeria should not be attacked, because nobody should die for this.
Nigeria's stock exchange all-share index erased previous day loss to resume Tuesday's trading uptrend, inching up by 0.11% to close at 32,417.82 basis points. Here is a quick check of the closing figures. And that's business news. Thanks for being there. I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
All right, thank you very much, Chimobi, for the business package. Next for us now is a review of the stories in some of today's newspapers.
Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atebi, is here with us this morning. Good morning, Bayo.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Bayo, good to see you. Let's begin by taking a look at the inside pages of the papers that we have this morning, beginning with the Daily Trust. At page 7 of the Daily Trust, there are 3 stories there. We'll deal with anyone against Nigeria's unity. That's according to President Buhari. Also there on the page, Senate seeks Stakeholders Summit on flood. And below the photograph on the front page, on page 7 of the Daily Trust, missing general, reps divided over army's investigation. Those are the stories from page 7 of the Daily Trust. And we go to the Nigerian pilot, which also has a story on the president saying we are battle ready for Nigeria's unity. That story is attributed, as I said, to the president. And coming to Daily Sun at page 3, Daily Sun at page 3 says, court affirms Buhari's executive order number 6. That's it for the Daily Sun.
All right, let's move on quickly to the New Telegraph, and we're going to page 30. There's a story there that might interest you. It says, Buhari urges economic team to focus on economy. That's from the New Telegraph, and you can get details of the story on page 30. Let's move quickly to the Daily Trust newspaper. Cabotage, federal government ends waivers to oil firms. And from there, we'll move quickly to page 10 on the Daily Sun newspaper. It says, save journalism from dying. And that comment is coming from journalists in Nigeria. They're saying that to, Oshibajo is telling editors to save journalism from dying. And a little bit below is another story. INEC lists threats to 2019 elections.
All right, let's return to the Daily Trust, this time at an earlier page, that's page 3. There are a couple of stories we'll take from there, and then, it says Nigeria requires $1 trillion to modernize energy infrastructure, and that's according to Oshibajo. And then Senate confirms 22 commissioners for NPC. NPC stands for National Population Commission. And story also there is the court upholding the president's executive order number 6. That's on page 3 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Back to the New Telegraph. We have the story, of course, there of the Senate approving the election budget for INEC. And then Daily Trust again says, consider women as running mates, Itagewa tells governorship candidates. Consider women as running mates, Itagewa tells governorship candidates. That's on page 9 of the Daily Trust.
And let's take you back to the Daily Sun newspapers. If you go to page 29, Nigerians must defend their votes in 2019. And that comment is attributed to Azugbo. He is the member representing Newi North, Newi South, and Ekusi Federal Constituency, Chris Azugbo. Quickly, let's take a look at the Nigerian pilot. The Nigerian pilot. Northern governors not doing enough for quality education. And that comment is coming from the Emir of Kano, Sanusi. Quickly, we go to the Daily Trust, page 12. Drug abuse worsening youth's mental problems. Below that, if you see below the picture story, federal government asks to protect girl child. This is coming on the heels of the celebration of the Day of the Girl Child.
All right, we'll take over now from the New Telegraph. New Telegraph, there are 3 stories there. One comes with a kicker, that's on page 7 of New Telegraph. Okoromo, it says, INEC and security agencies threat to 2019 polls with a rider, Olni, Alafin, and others task Yoruba on unity. Flood, that's another kicker. Senate urges federal government to rehabilitate dams. And anti-party, Labour Party suspends 8 National Working Committee members. The Punch newspaper is next for us, and it's on page 12. Flooding still, it says NEMA declares national disaster in 5 more states as Senate seeks federal government's lasting solution. And also from the Punch newspaper at page 9, ICPC discovers federal government's 9.8 billion naira hidden in bank and grills managing director.
Okay, thank you very much. Where do I start? President Muhammadu Buhari has emphasized that anybody that tries to joke with the unity of this country has a problem. And he has said, as long as we are alive, he declared this while receiving the monarch, or a monarch from Oguta, who is also the chief imam of Oguta, his Eze Abdul Fattah Emetuma. The president said, our single objective is how to make Nigeria better, and we will never get tired of that. The Eze Emetuma commended the president and his love for Nigeria and the purposeful leadership he has provided. He said that it is noteworthy that his administration has been able to consign the anarchists like Boko Haram as a bitter pill. And today, locally produced rice are now outnumbered imported rice. From the report that you read about the Federal High Court Abuja order, the court is presided over by Justice Ijeoma Ojukwu, and she ruled that it is within the powers of the president to proclamate Executive Order 6 that was issued. He said, however, the power of the Attorney General of the Federation in exercising that executive power must be in accordance with the Constitution. The court order must be obtained first before such assets are seized or frozen. The other story that Kingsley read relates to the discovery by ICPC of a quantum sum of about 9.8 billion. This was supposed to have accrued from sales of federal government assets and houses between the year 2010 and 2014. The ASO Savings Bank was required to have remitted this to the Federal Treasury, but it did not. The accounting officer has been interrogated, and he has indicated that the agency is prepared to forfeit its property, assets in Abuja and Lagos as a purpose of exchange for the 9.8 billion that is required to be accounted for. The ICPC is also to have the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing to make evaluation of those property to ensure that they amount to the 9.8 billion that is meant for the government's coffers.
All right, but let's go quickly to our editorial for today, and it is taken from the Punch newspaper. It is titled, Prosecute Corrupt Judges After Dismissal. The coast is now clear for 2 federal high court judges to be prosecuted following their indictment by the National Judicial Council, which investigated allegations of corruption filed against them by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Already, they have been suspended pending their dismissal from service by President Muhammadu Buhari as recommended by the NJC. The president should strike the iron while it is still hot. Now, judges are not alone in this disgraceful preoccupation. The NJC rightly observed that lawyers and others outside the legal profession acted as conduits for the bribery. Therefore, these accomplices, especially the lawyers, should be subjected to the same due process of the law. That is the only way to fully restore sanity to the dispensation of criminal justice. Indeed, the society does not operate 2 sets of penal codes, one for the larger society and the other for judicial officers and lawyers.
Well, the editorial is just making a summation of the recent developments. If you recall, the NJC, as its last sitting, actually recommended 2 judges to be suspended. One was for receiving from litigants, lawyers, some sums of money over cases before it. The other was also said to have received sums of money from personalities, individuals, government officials, and business personalities that were paying sums into the accounts in the name of the judge. However, the editorial observed that between 2009 and 2014, 64 judges have been compulsorily retired for one misdemeanor or the other. And the editorial is emphasizing that it's not enough to suspend the judges or retire them. Where there has been such allegations and they have been found out to be true, they should be prosecuted.
All right, Bayo, that's the much that we can take. Unfortunately, the papers that were reviewed or the pages that were reviewed, they didn't have the stories. We have had a number of obituaries of prominent Nigerian citizens lately. I'm sure you're aware of that. Senator David Dafinone passed away at the age of 91. He was a senator in the Second Republic, in the Old Bengal. And the significance of the Dafinone family was that the family had an entry in the Guinness Book of Records. Has been a family with
number of lawyers?
Chartered accountants.
Accountants, okay.
Chartered accountants. And then Mr. Alison Aida has also passed away. Alison Aida was one of the super palmsecs, if you remember, of the 70s. And he rose to become head of service and secretary to the federal military government, as it was then called. You remember that until the Babangida administration, the offices of the head of service and secretary to the government were fused. Those 2 offices were fused before. That's Alison Aida passing away at the age of 88, one of those
Alison
super
Aida, there were 8 of them that were known as super palmsecs during that era of the administration.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. All right, Bayo, that's the much that we can take. I'd like to thank you for being around. See you on Monday.
Thank you.
It's Good Morning Nigeria. Let's take a short break now.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. To start our conversation this morning, let's join Kunle Adeyeye with a background report.
Natural disasters like flood, earth tremor were alien to Nigeria about 3 decades ago, not until the tail end of the 20th century when the country began to have its own share. One of the most horrifying floods in Nigeria happened in 2012 when many lost their lives, houses submerged, millions forced to take refuge in almost uninhabitable shelters. The losses and damages caused by the flood amounted to billions of naira. Another natural disaster, earth tremor, that one would have think is exclusive to some countries in Asia and South America, threatened Jaba community in Koi area in southern part of Kaduna State on September 11, 2016. The federal government mobilized its geoscientists to the site to conduct some tests, and people's apprehension were immediately doused. As the rainy season was approaching this year, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency NIMET warned that there will be much rains this year. Some states on the coastal line were placed on flood alert. Early in September this year, residents of a suburb community in the FCT, Mpape, woke up to experience serious vibration of their buildings, which experts described as earth tremor. On the 2nd of October this year, suspicious substances emitted in the same Mpape causing volcanic eruptions scare, but the federal government intervened and findings revealed it was uncontrolled in situ vitrification caused by high temperature in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 degrees centigrade. On Wednesday, October 10, the National Emergency Management Agency NEMA declared national disasters in 2 states of the Federation, Bayelsa and River. And just yesterday, NEMA also declared national disaster in 3 other states, making it 9 so far this year. Consequently, some have decried the lack of forecast equipment and evacuation of centers for emergency situations, while some believe the Nigerian Meteorological Survey and other agencies should be well equipped to effectively perform their primary functions. The ripple effects of natural disasters, which include the likely outbreak of an epidemic, famine as a result of washed away farmlands, humanitarian crisis, and infrastructural damage. The level of response to these disasters is another factor that helps in mitigating the pains they inflict on the people. What is the level of threats and response to natural disasters in Nigeria? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria are earnestly waiting to provide answers.
All right, thank you very much, Kunle Adeyeye, for that background that we have joining us on the studios now to discuss the subject matter. First, we'd like to welcome Professor Charles Ofegbu. Professor Ofegbu is the director of the Institute of Geosciences and Earth Resources at Nasarawa State University in Kefi. Professor Ofegbu, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
Also here with us in the studios today, we're having him in Abuja. Usually he joins us from Kaduna. That's Professor Emmanuel Adano. He's Executive Director of the National Water Resources Institute based in Kaduna. Professor Adano, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
As always. And also here with us in the studios is Alex Sundubuisi Nwegbo, who is Director General of Nigerian Geological Survey Agency. Thank you for being with us on the program.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and Joy, we have...
And also, yes, in our Abuja studio, we have Dr. Onimode Bandele. He is the Deputy Director, Search and Rescue and Head, Secretariat, National Emergency Operations Center. It's a pleasure to have you join us.
Good morning.
All right, gentlemen, a pleasure to have you. I mean, you'll listen to the background report by our correspondent, Kunle Adeyeye. And from reports that we have all seen and read or heard of over the past 3 months or so, floods have caused quite some havoc around the country. But of course, floods aren't just the only natural disasters that the country contends with. So can we begin by perhaps having a scoping of Nigeria's vulnerability to disasters, natural or man-made, that could indeed wreak significant havoc and therefore be a cause for concern? Let's begin with the NEMA official, that's Dr. Bandele.
Thank you very much. Good morning. When you're talking about our vulnerability, NEMA as an agency has offices located in the 6 geopolitical zones, and we have 9 other operation offices. We work with the state emergency management agencies to do what we call hazard survey. And from this hazard survey, you do risk mapping. This risk mapping is with a view to assisting us to do quick assessment and understanding of where these occurrences are likely to be. And coming down to the issue of natural disasters, in NEMA we are able to know certain disasters that are prevalent in certain areas. But for the human-induced disasters, like it's called, it is a function of our own action or inaction on the environment that will lead to some of these disasters. So in summary, NEMA has positioned itself in conjunction with other stakeholders, especially the states, to do what we call vulnerability mapping and risk assessment.
What disasters do you know of, and then you said that will occur in certain locations, and where are those locations?
Okay, like if you look at the communities where we have bodies of water, we know that will be coastal erosions, talking of rivers, Lagos, Bayelsa, Delta. And if you come up north, You know, these are dryland areas. So at certain times, you should expect things like fire due to bush burning. Then in the southern part of Nigeria, where you have massive tree felling, exposes the vegetation, and you have cases of erosion. So these are pockets of assessment that has been done, and the agency is following up on its occurrences.
So in other words, talking about the current flood situation we're experiencing, you were already aware that we're going to have this?
Yes. For the flood, in March, sometimes in March, NIMED predicted we'll have volumes of water, and as soon as that was done, NEMA convened a stakeholder meeting, looked at this prediction, and brought out the disaster implication of this prediction. Sometimes along the line in May, our offices at the zonal operational levels were asked to meet with state government with the aim of taking these messages to the grassroots, to prepare Nigerians and make them aware that these are the likely occurrences. But as the case is in Nigeria, we always believe in God will help us. We need to help ourselves. We need to be on top of the situation. And we were monitoring the situation until September 6, when the Nigeria Hydrological Service Agency gave the first alert of massive hydrological flow along the riparian states of River Niger and Benue. And immediately that was done, NEMA called an enlarged stakeholder meeting for us to holistically look at it. And because we're a proactive agency, we sent out staff of the agency and members of our stakeholders to the 12 states that were mentioned with a view to looking at what is on ground, that is the preparedness of the states, the communities that have been impacted, or those ones that are likely to be impacted. We came back with this, did an analysis immediately, and the agency activated the National Disaster Management Framework and the National Contingency Plan. Contingency Plan gives you sectoral picture of what we are supposed to do: health, water resources, protection, etc.
All right, but Dr. Bandele, we'll come to those specifics with regard to the infrastructure that is required, the kind of equipment and personnel that will be required, so that you can have proper explanation or detailed explanation, if you like, into that aspect. Professor Emmanuel Adano, let's bring you in here. Now, of course, you are a water expert, and we have always relied on you as one of our guests to discuss these issues. In terms of disaster scoping in the country, what do we know? Natural, and of course, this time also man-induced.
Thank you very much. Disaster scoping. I think we're very much aware of the series of interviews we've been having here. I've been coming here several times. It's almost like a ritual. I told you one time. We have NIMED prediction. We had the flood outlook by the NISA. But if you look at the program and their predictions, it's along one line. This year, they predicted that about 35 states were going to be affected by flood, except Katsina. But unfortunately, in July, Katsina was about the first. So those predictions are not the best. The country is very susceptible to flooding, whether we like it or not. Prior to this time, 2012, we were blaming Cameroon for releasing water from Labdo Dam. This year, we monitored the Labdo Dam until this moment. They were still impounding. They didn't release when flood started in Nigeria. So the internally generated volume of water in Nigeria is enough to flood this country. And if that happens, what do? We have a situation where we can control this. We can control this. When NEMA comes into a situation like I feel very sad, is it possible for us to make sure that NEMA is not invited into a tragedy in the country? So that's what you should be thinking about. We are lucky to have the volume of water we have in the country and the distribution. We know exactly where they originate from, the flow pattern, the flow directions, the quantity that moves along every part of the country. We are very much aware of it. We know the volume. Over the past 40 years, We have an average volume that we are very sure of. And we know the direction of movement, the characteristics, the behavior, and the valley configurations. So why is it that we cannot come out and make sure that these disasters are reduced? Because you can't stop flooding, but you can use the water for other things. So sometimes you adjust your country to a situation that you'll be looking for the flood because of the use. If you go to South Korea today, you have 4 rivers. They call it the 4-river structure. The country depends on it totally. They want the flood.
Professor Adani, here's a follow-up question. You know, this is your field. You are aware of these challenges, and we've talked about them over the years on the program, even when we have special events that we go to cover. Why are we still having these challenges? Why can't we solve them?
I don't know, but I can tell you that the solution is that the 2 main rivers in the country, the Niger and the Benue, we know what they carry, and we know which other tributaries, like arteries, that provide water into this. Now, if we check them by damming them, those tributaries that supply water into this system, we can use the water under proper regulations, reservoir operation, the code of practice, which the Institute has just designed and is out. SON has informed us that it's ready. How to operate this? You will make sure that each time you will perceive this, you know what to do with the reservoirs. In the dry season, you can release water from the reservoirs, empty them sufficiently to accommodate the inflow in the rainy season, in which case the main rivers in the dry season will be sufficiently livened so that people can use it. In the rainy season, you hold back all the water in the dams so that the main river also will still have some water, but not to the flood. Now, the other problem that we get carried away with is this question of dredging. Now, it's good to dredge a river, but for what purpose? If you are dredging certain rivers for navigational purposes, okay, but you must know the characteristics of that river from its end to from the beginning to the end. You don't just dredge river. If I dredge maybe River Benue somewhere, and the materials coming from the tributaries, if you dredge it, you have improved its carriage capacity. But the materials coming from there can still come and silt it up. But that is not the only thing. If the carrying capacity is increased, where are you transferring that water to? You are transferring it down to the south. NEMA is giving us some problems now happening down south Delta area. What is the reason? It is because the water from the hinterland is now going there. So if you increase that volume of water that goes there by dredging inappropriately, the flooding can be just transferred from the hinterland, from within, down there. So we have to manage this in, and the river must be studied full.
Professor Adano, just before we bring in the other guests, I recall when we had this conversation on flooding some weeks ago, you did talk about proper dam management. And indeed, you were director of dams, the Federal Minister of Water Resources before your current assignment. That's why I asked the question earlier also, whether there are human-induced factors that could trigger natural disasters. Are we managing even the existing dams properly?
Yeah, I remember sometimes the code of practice wasn't out, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't manage your dam, because if you construct a dam, that's an operation rule you must follow. But sometimes we are very negligent about that. We have Goronyo now, which is totally distressed. Fortunately, it's impounding water now. Now, the siltation to some extent will prevent you from doing the proper management. If you are not sure of the volume of sand under the water, you may not know how to release the certain quantities. Management is actually operation, releasing and storage, releasing and storage, and then do proper management of the dam itself by checking the instruments and all these things. That is that. But we are doing it. But now a code of practice has come out which mandates every dam to. And if a dam doesn't have the structure that you can use to release water or flush, you must put it, because the code of practice says that all dams now must have such structures so that the operational facilities will be properly in place.
All right, thank you, Professor Adan. We'll come back to you in the course of our conversation. Let's go quickly to Professor Charles Ofegbu, and we still want you to take it from the point of view of Nigeria's vulnerability to natural disasters and those that are man-made. Where are we from your own perspective?
Well, I think we can't run away from disaster. Disaster is a consequence of human existence. Disaster is an integral part of nature. What worries one is that occasionally we enhance these disasters by our own actions. Nigeria is prone to natural hazards. The location of Nigeria, when you look at the map of the world, having in mind the oceans and the highlands and so on, we are bound to have these disasters. The flooding that we're having in this country now is not peculiar to Nigeria. You have a lot of flooding in China. You have flooding in Russia, even places that were known to be near desert, virtually desertified, they're being flooded now in Spain. In Spain, you are having it. You are even having the so-called wildfires in California and so on. These disasters, these are consequence of global events, consequence of global warming, consequence of our inability to control our activities. Increasingly, the water volume on the Earth's surface is increasing. The icebergs are melting. They are moving. The recent release from the US office shows that although the President of the United States of America keeps even fighting information, statistics that are coming out from the Antarctic survey of the different countries, shows that the ice is melting. And when it melts, it turns into water. And of course, it has to seek a place, it has to seek somewhere to be. So the volume of water is increasing as the temperature is increasing. The global temperature is rising. And unless something is done, flooding we're having in Nigeria now is bound to continue. What we should be worried about, most importantly, checkmating the consequences of these events. When we do have flooding, what do? We need to know that this country, the geology of this country is very diverse. What you find in Katsina, the scenario there is different. The geological maps in the southeast. We should also go back in historical and find out why do we have all this mass wastage in the southeast, the Agolonanka crises and things like that. There were some events, man-made events led to it. Let me just quickly tell you how man destroys itself. At the end of the Civil War, there was a desire by the military to put in place infrastructure in the southeast. The choice of the contractors, the construction companies, roads were cut up all over the place. Everywhere. Abatete, everywhere. Particularly, I've said it once on AIT or on NTA. Particular companies, these are the same people that parade themselves in this country as very wealthy. But they're the ones that have destroyed the environment. In some countries, they should have been on trial. They cut up these roads, opened them up, abandoned them, and originally stable platforms became unstable. And what do you have? Mass wastage, erosion, and gullying. Trace all the gullying, trace the growth, the increase in size of the Nanka, Agolo, places like that, even Ozobo, Ekusigo. Go and find out, you find out that this is a consequence of waste arose from uncontrolled, unregulated construction activity, and then also human habitation. Everybody in the Southeast wants to own a house, and we're building houses and blocking the normal, natural water flow. People just come somewhere, houses. You wake up one day, you see someone building a duplex right in the middle. I think we should also begin to be ready to find out what is not wait. My problem, some of us were involved in the NEMA coming under the National Technical Committee on Natural Hazards during the military in the 1980s. But I think NEMA should not be waiting. NEMA should be working not only with NIMET when they say there will be flooding. You should begin to ask yourself, why do we have this? Like in the United States, they already know that at certain times of the year, North Carolina, South Carolina, they're going to have hurricane, flash flooding. How do you predict flash flooding? Of course you cannot.
I'm glad that you're touching on most of the pertinent issues. But the thing is, thank God we have relevant agencies in the studio. How proactive are they?
That is the problem. I think NEMA is supposed to work hand in hand with a mass agency. It's also supposed to work hand in hand with the research institutes where the think tanking takes place. And the Geological Survey Agency will always be there to provide info, because whether we like it, he's a geologist. I'm a geophysicist. NEMA, I had once wanted to know to what extent does NEMA relate to Geological Survey Agency. If you don't have that networking of the system in the country, that is what our problem. You can never, what you do is every year you buy mattresses. NEMA will buy mattresses. NEMA will do this. Is that supposed to be the ritual? And how prepared are they even for tomorrow? How can they even predict what will happen? At the moment, we are not in a position to even predict because we don't even have a data bank. We don't even have historical information that enable, because you need to know the past, then the present, if you are to talk about the future.
All right, Professor Ofebo, you've raised a number of points. I mean, NEMA is, we have an official from NEMA here to respond to this. But I thought that at the beginning of his response to our initial question on disaster scoping, he did talk about the extent to which NEMA has gone. Let's say for this year, for instance, but he's still here, so he will have the opportunity of responding to the points that you have made, but we'll pause him in the meantime. And just to clarify, for you to clarify the issue, you have identified what some may describe as irresponsible construction activities as one of the causative factors for the erosion in the southeast. How then would you also respond to the claims by some persons that the southeast or parts of the tracts of the southeast are prone to sheet erosion?
That is where the geology comes in. And we're supposed to take into account the known geology of the area when we want to start construction. We're also supposed to take into account the known geology of the area as we plan for the present and for the future. It's not just the southeast. When you move, I happen to have been in charge of the Road Research Institute for a couple of years, that's some 20 years or more ago. When you move towards Karen Lamode, we talk so much about the southeast. You move through Mutumbi, you just move from Kasna Ala through Mutumbi, you see exfoliation of the road. The road is exfoliating. And that is as a consequence of the geology of that area. You tar that road today, by tomorrow, by the time you pass through Mutumbi, you see it peeling in big chunks and dropping. Once you have a heavy rain or sandstorm, that's a crisis on its own. As you're going to Karen Lamode from Numan, you see the bridges that have been built on that road. I don't know how many people have passed that road, have been carried away and put somewhere else, a whole bridge and everything. That is a very serious problem. And I think this is because we build road, those things are cited, let's excite the people who've put this road here. Nobody has come around and said, Geological Survey, can you let us know the consequences of doing this road? Call him Adanu, can we know the consequences of having in mind water flow and things like that? So I think that is a problem. In the southeast, we have peculiar problems vis-a-vis the geology. It has to do with the sand. It has to do with the formations we have there. For example, if you have cement, a bag of cement on the floor now, and then you put something on top of it, and then you drop a little water on it, when it gets to where you have that cement, it will just move, slide. It's slippery. It's a similar thing happening in Anambra State because you have these shales, you have these sandstones, and ordinarily when they are at rest, you have no problem. But once you disturb them, the little water that comes in percolates, and then you have mass movement. That's why you wake up in the morning, you see a house that was standing here has been carried and dropped somewhere in a dish.
Thank you, Professor Charles Ofebo. We'll come back to you shortly. Let's go quickly to Dr. Alex Ndubisi Nwegbo. Professor Ofebo has raised a number of issues. I would like you to respond to them, especially as it concerns synergy between relevant agencies. But before you do that, let's hear your own perspective about Nigeria and natural disasters.
Well, thank you very much. I'll address it from the perspective of the organization I'm heading, Nigerian Geological Surveys. You know, there are national institutions responsible for generating geoscience data. And most times there's this misconception that our responsibility is just for mineral investment. It goes far beyond that. Because the Mother Earth is actually what we have a responsibility to have, to sustain by our own use. The information we generate has a lot to do with natural disasters. Just as the Prof rightly said, a lot of these natural disasters are a function of the type of geology. And so before you start any construction, you have to first of all get a geological map of the area, because that tells you the vulnerability of that particular ecosystem regarding what you want to do. For instance, if you want to construct a dam, the first step is to get a geological map. What kind of geology do you have in that area? What kind of structures do you have? Because once you build a dam on fracture system, the integrity of the dam is already compromised, and it's prone to failing and creating a lot of problems for the populace. The same thing happens even in erosion. Like he rightly said, the Nanka sand is very unconsolidated. And so any anthropogenic misuse of the environment creates a disproportionate effect on the ecosystem. And that is why, because we have a particularly friable rock system in the southeast, that is why they are so vulnerable to massive erosion. The same thing happens, for instance, in the northeastern side, where you have what we call the cotton soils. Once you build a road without taking into consideration the type of geology we have in the area, you are inviting disaster naturally. And the same thing happens even in erosion, except you understand the geomorphology. What is the flow pattern of rivers? In what particular area do you think flooding will happen? And once you begin to construct buildings along channels, you are inviting disaster. And at the same time, even in construction, as he said, when you do improper termination of drainage systems, these are anthropogenic factors that actually aggravate natural disasters. So we have to be careful the way we manage our environment. But as I said, we must understand what information do we need to start the process in the first place. And that is where this collaboration comes in. There has to be a synergy. For instance, construction companies should daily visit the geological survey to understand what kind of geology. Do you have geological maps? NEMA, we should always be collaborating with NEMA, because this gives us a proactive direction, the way we should be going, as well as water resources as well. So these are all agencies that have a reason to build synergy so that we can feed ourselves on information that we have generated for the betterment of the management of the ecosystem.
Mr. Wangbo, thank you very much. And indeed, gentlemen, thanks a lot. Joy, I'm wondering, usually when we are discussing disasters, reference is often quickly made to NEMA. From the look of things, NEMA actually deals with the back end of things. You know, when the disaster is already upon, yes, it's already upon us, as we have seen in this year with regard to flooding. But there are very serious political, economic, and ultimately social consequences arising from the way we interact with our environment. Not just environment as we speak broadly, but dealing with right from the rock formation, the soils, as the experts are telling us now. So I still want to stick, Joy, I would like us to still stick with Iwegbo and Professor Ofegbo as well. First, from the Nigerian Geological Survey Agency, who normally are your clients? Who are those that will approach you to say we need geological information or survey information before we start construction, rather than a governor or a local government chairman or the president going somewhere and say, look, we're going to give you this bridge, a 15-kilometer bridge. And after that one, we have the phenomenon of what Ofebo described. The bridge, will be dancing as though it were faced with a tsunami. Who are those that normally will patronize you?
Well, the point is that so long as you have something to do with the earth, the ground on which we are, then you have a responsibility to approach the Nigerian Geological Survey for information. Be it water company, because where you explore for water depends too on the geology. Be it oil exploration companies, where you look for oil depends on the geology. Be it mining companies, you need geology. There are even agriculture. Strangely, we have what we call the agro-minerals. How well your crops perform depends too on the geology. And of course, you need the geological map for you to understand what you need to plant, how you need to remediate in case you have some chemistry that is not favoring a particular crop. So basically, it's all encompassing in terms of who needs the information on geology and who wants the application of the information that we have. It's all encompassing.
For instance, are you approached regularly by, say, state governments or even the federal government with regard to road construction, bridge construction? The talk now is about infrastructure. Even though the World Bank has admitted that Nigeria was misdirected in seeking to get Nigeria to invest more in infrastructure rather than human capital development.
I think this is where the advocacy should come in. We need to upscale our advocacy, because a lot of people really do not understand the application of certain data that we have or we generate in their own functions. So we are approached by construction companies and the rest, but not to the level that we expect. And so that is why I'm advocating that we need to get people understand the negative effect on not applying certain level of information that we generate in their assignments.
Now, talking about advocacy, what are you doing in terms of reaching out to these agencies and subnationals? If they're not coming to you, what are you doing in terms of getting to them?
Well, we usually have what we call the Mirror Clinic at the end of every month, different offices across the nation, where we invite people to come for information in different areas of their activities. And so we have a website as well where we engage. It's a platform where we engage all the stakeholders that have something to do with geology. So we are going to improve on the level of the advocacy, but we are doing something about it, and we hope that with time, people will understand the importance of the information we generate on their various activities.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Wegbu. Well, Professor Ofebo, I would like to take you back to your initial comments. When you said that Nigeria is prone to disasters, I'm sure that would have come as a shock to persons who always assume that, you hear of hurricanes, you hear of typhoons, you hear of earthquakes, some of those usually catastrophic acts of God. But from what has been described so far, there's evidence is available that indeed we could be prone to many more disasters. Now, how conscious are we at the planning levels, in governmental action and then private action, with regard to understanding the earth upon which we are planting infrastructure, our private houses, and indeed operating our socio-economic activities?
Yes, I think Nigeria, we have always had this tendency, believe that we are not prone to natural disasters. Whenever something happens, there's flooding. Oh, somebody will come out and say, since when? That is because the people, their minds are not prepared that these things could happen. When you look at a country like Nigeria, dissected by two major rivers, River Niger, River Benue, stretching from Niger Republic right down and then joining the Niger Delta. Then you have one of the biggest deltas in the world, close to the Atlantic, whose evolution is as a consequence of the opening of even the Atlantic, the separation of Africa from South America. You're bound to realize that whatever is happening on the other side of the globe it's a matter of time. The earth is always moving. There's always some motion. For example, the Cameroon line, which we have today, the volcanic line, the Cameroon line, was ordinarily supposed to have been in the middle of the year, but for some plate rotation, some rotation that took place, and then swept it, and it not happened where it is. You can imagine what will be happening in Nigeria today if the Cameroon line was not, that rotation did not take place. Nobody knows. There is always motion taking place. It may be minute, but it gets to a point, especially with the way the way we have managed our climate, our environment globally. One day, you'll be surprised, the entire Niger Delta could be flooded. My colleague from NEMA talked about coastal erosion. I don't know if you've gone on boat from Yenagoa and gone in far deep into the delta. You see what we call the desert swamps. You see in a river, right by the river, plants are turning yellow, they're turning dry. So suddenly you have swamps being desertified. And it's continuing. So this country is bound to be prone to natural disaster. Now we're talking about tremors. We've talked about tremors. The whole of yesterday we spent it discussing on the cabinet meeting on tremors. Then people are saying, well, how could it happen? Well, we're not in a very, very serious seismic. When we look at the seismic map of the world, because of the level of seismicity, you may not see Nigeria, any dot around Nigeria, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen, it wouldn't happen. And then, if for any reason, look at Benue. Why is Lokoja always flooded? The area around Lokoja. Well, volume of water increased because of the rainy season. My colleague, my friend, has talked about dredging. Part of the problem is also that in the middle of where was supposed to be the Benue River, is now an island. The same thing at Onitsha. When water doesn't find its way through, of course, it empties anywhere it sees. So as water is coming down, that was why that program on the dredging, it wasn't supposed to be dredging per se. The idea was to clear the Benue and the River Niger of all that, what do you call the plants? The
water hyacinth.
Hyacinths and what have you. And eliminate those islands. Agreed. Eliminate those islands. We are supposed to realize now that the volume of water will continue increasing with global warming. And they eliminate those islands so that water can flow. That is why in the US even they've done it. They did it. Why is it that increasingly the hurricanes, the flood is no longer getting as disastrous? It's still serious. They're less serious than it was a few years because now they're creating paths for this water to flow. Our own is that we're watching River Benue turn into an island. So when you remove that, the water flows. The water is not flowing. I stopped. As a geophysicist, I had to stop with my boys. I said, let's even find out why is this place flooded every year? Go and look at the part of the flood by that bridge, by the Motala Bridge. It's the same place. The water is coming, that water hyacinth and also stops it flowing. Of course, water seeks its own level. I think it's simple. Then it empties on the community and drives them away. Next year, it repeats itself. I think we need to come as a country and say, why should this be happening at a particular time of the year, every year, and solve the problem and bring all the agencies that are relevant together to work hand in hand and remove this problem. We have the resources and the human capital.
You know, Kingsley, I'm worried because, listening to him talk now, a few weeks back, we had some, I don't want to mention name, agencies that should know, telling us that we're not sitting on the disaster belt. Now, with what we're hearing now, how do you explain that? I mean, to the lay people like us, how do you explain to us that we're not sitting on the belt? And yet, some school of thought will tell you that with global warming and the things that we're experiencing today, we should be looking into this. Professor Adano.
Yes, we have this tendency of constructing sentences attaching them to incidences, even those who are not professionals. As soon as it happens, they go out, they tell people on this and that. Some will go to Wikipedia or something like that, find the definition, and then try to explain to everybody. Now, we've been talking about the surface disaster, the one the earth uses to wash itself, clean itself. What of the internal one? Prof mentioned something about seismicity here. Now, if you don't see Nigeria on the earthquake list or belt, it doesn't mean it cannot happen. What happened in Koi 2016 and what happened in Mpapi recently, we can never just exclude our views that Nigeria doesn't sit on. Now, most of the earthquakes that are recorded, they are along the mobile beds of the world. The earth is just like an egg with a shell, which is a crust of the earth. Then the inside, every other thing there is solid, is liquid. The crust is just like the shell, but it's not as continuous. It's broken into fragments, and it rotates, jostles over the... Now, earthquakes happen mainly at the boundaries of this. There are about 7 major ones, 8 minor, and some subsidiary plates. So they jostle over. So earthquakes and volcanoes happen along this, and Nigeria does not fall within that. That's why we say we don't have. Africa sits on the African plate, which is bounded by several other plates. South American plate here, Antarctica here, Australia, India, the Caribbean, Laurasia, and the Arabian. So Africa is hemmed up there. But over the years, we have incidences of intraplate earthquakes. That's earthquakes that do not belong to the plate boundaries. They happen within the plate itself. And these intraplate earthquakes can be devastating. Fortunately, the tremors we have recorded in Nigeria are just 2.93 on the Richter scale. But we've had intraplate earthquakes devastating. In 2011, Gujarat in India, it killed about 20,000 people. If you go to, they call it Little Madrid, it's a small area bordered by Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri. Very active. In 1811 and 1812, it was so devastating. These are earthquakes that have Richter scale number up to 8. In Botswana recently, 2017, it's about 6.5. They are all intraplate earthquakes. And the origin of interplate earthquakes in Nigeria, we should never rule it out. Something happens under the ground and it comes up. That's a black spot. Professor Fegu was just talking about the way South America separated from Africa. That's the same process. A hot spot originates within the earth crust, mantle. Below it's about 2,000 kilometers from here, under the ground. Hot spot. So the molten material comes up in a form of a cylinder with convection. Yes, convection. It comes to the base of the crust and starts eroding it in a convention mode. It's hot. It erodes this. And because this plate is also in a curved surface, it will just snap. So as it's eroding this, we call it lithospheric delamination. It erodes it gradually. So it breaks. And when it breaks, it hangs. So in future, what provides eternal life for such intraplate earthquake is supply of water. When there's continuous water supply into the cracks, that hanging portion will slip again. You have a tremor.
All right.
And Nigeria has it.
Well, Professor Adanu, that soundbite is very significant so that we don't get complacent. In fact, that's the reason why we are focused on this. There are many more points to touch on. We're expecting 2 guests to join us. We understand the guests are available now from Lagos and Benin Network Studios. First, from Lagos, we'd like to welcome Mr. Desmond Majakodumi. You can see him on the right side of the screen. He's an environmentalist. Pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria, Mr. Majakodumi.
It's a pleasure and indeed an honor to be here.
The director in charge of flood and erosion control of the Edo State Ministry of Environment and Sustainability. That's Engineer Igbobawaye Aifuwa. Engineer Aifuwa, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Let's begin with Mr. Desmond Majakodumi in Lagos. I don't know how much of the conversation you've caught, but quite significantly, just in addition to what we see on the surface, there are issues pertaining to the bowels of the earth upon which Nigeria sits that should be of concern to every Nigerian. But from the point of view of an environmentalist, how are we responding to, or first even understanding, and then responding to disasters, natural or man-made?
Well, I must say that some of the recent pronouncements that have been coming out of the presidency, the most recent one at the Independence Day speech, have been very encouraging, because there's obviously a strong focus on the effects of particularly global warming, which is causing climate change, on our ecosystems. And this has been consistent. Nigeria was one of the first countries to endorse the COP 2015 treaty, which actually mankind finally agreed that we are damaging our environment. And we environmental activists, we don't call it environment. We call it our life support system. And during the discussions of this panel, we've been hearing some very pertinent references towards our effects, the anthropogenic activities having negative effects on various ecosystems. And I think we need to really focus on this far, far more. We should take a cue from the presidency. We should take a cue from our Minister of Environment, who has been very, very pertinently highlighting these issues. And just recently, on Monday, the International Panel for Climate Change came out with a report on the consequences on planet Earth of us reaching 1.5 degrees temperature above industrial average temperature level. And it was shocking, absolutely shocking. And it should be particularly worrying to us here in Nigeria, because we were identified as one of the most vulnerable areas to environmental degradation. And this has been brought out by the professorial panel that you have there. We're vulnerable to desertification, we're vulnerable to massive erosion, we're vulnerable to sea incursion. So we need to really, really take note. This report just came out and it has shocked the world. And interestingly, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, in a recent statement said, how many times will the alarm bell have to blow before we take the necessary action to safeguard our environment? And remember, we said it's our life support system, but, and this is the one that really pierces my heart, it's not just our life support system. It is a life support system that was bestowed onto us by an extremely benevolent God. He put it in our care, and it is something that we must hand over to our children who are so trusting. And surely it is our responsibility to ensure that we give our children a life support system, an environment that has full integrity. After all, when we adopted it from our forefathers, it was fully functional. All these tragedies and all these catastrophic events we're having, they are anthropogenic induced. It is one of the symptoms of climate change. And it is not rocket science. You apply more heat to a liquid solution, particularly H2O, water, you're going to have more energy in that system. That's why you're having more evaporation. That's why you're having heavier rain. Right now in Florida, they have just experienced the most voracious hurricane that has ever hit that coast of America. If you see the pictures of the coastal area, it is just a disaster zone, totally wiped out, totally flattened. And this was just a Category 4 hurricane. We are pouring so much energy into the system that it is fighting back. And just before I let you come in here, we just have to say that this is also scripturally injuncted. Oh yes, the scriptures are very, very clear about our role towards the creation. We're all supposed to be creation carers. And there's one thing about Mother Nature. God will forgive you all the time. Man will forgive you some of the time. But Mother Nature, if you slap Mama, she's going to slap you back.
Thank you very much, Desmond Majakodumi. It's always a pleasure listening to you. Now, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll get back to the rest of our guests for more on this conversation. Stay with us.
All right, thank you very much. It's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's go over now to our guests at the Benin Network Studios. That's Engineer Ifuwa, who's Director of Flood and Erosion Control in the State Ministry of Environment. And Engineer Ifuwa, I hope you also had the benefit of listening to the other guests. Of course, Nema took the first shot of this conversation and has been silent for quite a while, obviously, as we were discussing other geological and related matters. But from a state perspective, tell us something. In dealing, for instance, with the back end of natural disasters, how has Edo State responded? And assuming you want to use that, to extrapolate into what other states are doing and should do. With our guest there in the Benin Network Studios, I hope if the engineers give us an all clear, can he hear us now? All right, we understand he cannot hear us. There are tweets that have come in, so let's quickly run through those tweets before we get the all clear to return to Benin and then take our guests. Otherwise, we continue with the other guests. Victor Hiosoma has this tweet. Nigeria has not had an earthquake in the real sense of it, but the country is not immune from it. Recent tremors in Abuja and other parts of the country are a pointer that relevant government agencies should take proactive measures to prevent or contain natural disasters when they occur.
The next one is coming from Festus Akimboyewa. He tweets, given Nigeria's vulnerability to natural disasters, government at all levels should invest in science to improve forecasts towards identifying timely and location of natural disasters and ensure that those who need to take action or be evacuated have access to the information.
Sonny Michael Omakoje tweets, now, if we must fight natural disasters, we must be sincere to ourselves and accept that we are not proactive enough. There is a need to channel the ecological funds into mitigating the effects of flooding and other disasters.
The next one is coming from Mike Anyokwan. He tweets, disaster management has always been a big issue in the country. Experience has shown that people and communities affected by disasters are left to the mercy of God in deplorable conditions.
Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet. It says, the low level of technological know-how employed to combat disasters adds to the problem. Now, there is need for agencies and stakeholders concerned to employ the use of GIS and other forms of modern technology in managing risks and disasters in both rural and urban areas.
Still from Daily Jack Solomon Merge, there is the need also to mainstream disaster risk reduction into our development plans in Nigeria in order to reduce disasters to acceptable and tolerable levels.
And this is coming from a Twitter handle, DW Nigeria. We have the plan ahead like other countries do. We wait until a disaster happens before acting, which is a fire brigade approach. Now, there is need for the orientation of our people on the type of disasters Nigeria is susceptible to and how they can safeguard themselves before the arrival of government aid. Of course, this is part of what our guests have been talking about, dredging up issues from the crust of the earth.
That's right.
As to how vulnerable this our country might be.
Chris Simon tweets, we should bear it in mind that natural disasters like flood, earthquake, tsunami, and even volcanic eruption can occur at any time. It is our place to be watchful and get prepared.
Cecilia Okoroma, most disasters in Nigeria are man-made, such as people building on waterways and indiscriminate disposal of refuse, which block water channels. There is need for enforcement against such practices.
I guess that's about it. Yeah.
All right, we have another set here. Just very quickly, let's take this from Osman Bane Kantu. It says the threat of natural disasters can be envisaged but cannot be ascertained. Hence the need to involve experts and periodic review of contingency plans and adequate budget and prompt releases of funds.
And the next one is coming from Abdul Basit. With the recent earth movements being experienced in Abuja, isn't there a need for the review of structural design codes and building techniques in the country?
All right. Thank you very much for your tweets. Let's bring in the NEMA director who's been with us and has been silent since his initial comments. Dr. Bandele, a number of points have been raised, but with regard to dealing with the back end of disasters, when disaster strikes, what do you do? One of the commonest occurrences that we find happening around, and you may wish to relate this to how NEPA deals with other strata of government, particularly the subnationals, as my colleague Joy had earlier indicated. We find that persons who are affected by natural disasters such as flooding are almost invariably left on their own. Now you have early warning signs, leave the river banks, leave the river banks. But they ask themselves, where do they go to? Now, what kind of equipment is available for dealing with this? What kind of personnel are also available for the disaster management agencies, whether at the national or at the subnational levels? And what kind of temporary shelters can be provided? Elsewhere, you find tents being constructed very rapidly. Do we have manufacturing companies? These are those ones that make tarpaulins that can be contracted so that you buy local, you boost the economy.
Thank you very much. When it comes to response, NEMA does not go alone. Take, for instance, the flooding that we're talking about. Let's cast our mind to 2012. After the 2012 flood, there was a Presidential Committee on Flood Response and Rehabilitation. They constructed some hostels in upland areas, and these have been captured and identified by the agency. And I want all of us to know that disaster management, as it is in the at the national level, is supposed to be at the state level. But unfortunately, some of the states are not there when these things happen. We have state emergency management agencies that are there but are not functional. So when anything happens, it is NEMA at the national that rushes down to do it. At the inception of this flooding, communities were identified, like I said. Those highland, upland area where they could be moved to were identified. And we try to work with state government that, look, these are places you could move these people. Don't forget, when NEMA was doing its preparatory response, we have links with the military. And as soon as this happened, there's what we call the DRE in the military that gives us a facility for evacuation. And sometimes we even go to the commercial boat operators. We pay for these services to move people as quickly as possible to uplands. When they get to this upland, like I said, there are some that are constructed, but where this becomes inadequate, NEMA has tents. Like in Bayelsa, as I speak to you, NEMA moved its tent that are already pre-positioned at the Port Harcourt zonal office, move it to that place, erect it so that people can use it. So the idea is, in our preparedness, we look forward to things that might happen. As we do a stockpiling of shelter-like equipment, we stockpile food and non-food items too. So as soon as this started, food were moved from our warehouses to this displaced person. So systematically, NEMA is being prepositioned. But our appeal is, as NEMA at the federal level tries to give its best, the state and the local government should come on board so that there will be synergy and all of us will have a seamless coordination of disaster management issues.
All right, we'll come back to you shortly on that. I have a follow-up question, but let's go over to our Benin Network Center to join Engineer Aifua, who is the Director of Flood and Erosion Control Ministry of Environment and Sustainability in Edo State. I hope you can hear me now. We're looking at disasters now and how to manage them, and we're also focusing on subnational. So I want to look at Edo State, for instance. We're talking about the issue of flood. How is Edo handling that situation, aside from what NEMA is doing at the federal level?
To be a challenge with the audio connection to Benin. So, well, let's just appreciate Engineer Waifo. He, of course, has been in the studios. Unfortunately, he cannot hear us, and so he's unable, therefore, to respond to our questions. I asked one, he also asked another.
Yes, before we go to Lagos, just a quick follow-up with
NEMA,
him.
yes.
You know, I was talking about the subnationals, and I want to take you to Kogi State, for instance. Just a few days ago, we heard that the situation with flood there is much better. But there is a bigger challenge on ground right now. The people who are going back to where they were before they were evacuated are having a huge problem with resettlement, and they're right now confused. I mean, how do you deal with that kind of situation? You move people from where they were because of the challenge, and now you brought them back, and then they're confused.
Let me quickly add that the water is receding, not that it has receded. So anybody going back now may be doing a disservice to the community. After some period of time, NEMA is not just going to stop at the response stage. There's going to be a post-disaster need assessment of the people and the community. It is only when the result of this PDNA is done that we'll know how to advise those people in the community, how to advise the state government, and where need be, we'll put a report to the federal government as to what to do to at least mitigate in the future the effect of such occurrences. Because it is now, I would say, you cannot differentiate response from recovery. So we are really in response now. So when it gets to recovery, pre-recovery period is when the PDNA will be done. Then we'll advise as needed.
But are you working well with Kogi State at the moment?
Very well. Let me tell the audience that as it stands today, we didn't just stop at camp management. Where we think water supply is going to be a problem, the agency deployed a state-of-the-art equipment. As of yesterday, it worked at St. Pius Primary School camp in Kotonkarufi, and it could move to Central Primary School today in the same Kotonkarufi. So we are with the state government. The food supply is directly distributed to the inhabitants of this camp by NEMA in collaboration with SEMA and other stakeholders. So there is no way you can manage the response activity in the state exclusive of the state government. That would be wrong, because the procedure is you get in there, you identify the SEMA. We have an emergency operations center that is located in Lokoja, and the office is provided by the state government.
All right, Dr.
So we are working
Bamdele,
together.
thank you very much. Let's return to Mr. Desmond Majakodume in our Lagos Network Center. Mr. Majakodume, of course, we hope the lines to you are also not clogged at this time. But there's a tweet that came in, and it was talking about the ecological funds. I'm wondering, of course, there have been a few convictions with respect to the mismanagement of the ecological funds by some state governments. What could the NGOs do with regard to seeking to galvanize better and more targeted expenditure of ecological funds in seeking to mitigate our disasters?
relevant and excellent question. Well, we are already doing it, and it is called Follow the Money. Follow the money. There are several NGOs, there's some young guys in Abuja who set up a fantastic connected development NGO, and they are pioneering this move. And particularly on the ecology fund. You know, when it comes to security vote and this, that, and the other, well, that's another, but ecology fund, because this is funds that are dedicated towards preventing natural disasters, that are dedicated towards protecting life and property, particularly of the most vulnerable. And this sort of funds must go to the areas they are dedicated to. Having said that, we've noticed that recently there appears to be a more judicious appropriation of these funds. And this is very, very encouraging indeed. In days gone by, especially years back, it was shocking. It was shocking. You know, we were personally involved in lobbying to get ecology funds to come and protect the Lagos shoreline, which was being massively eroded. The former president came, made all sorts of proclamations. The money never came. And the shoreline was massively eroded. Lagos State itself had to now come to the rescue of a federal territory, which is the shoreline. So definitely the NGOs are on that. But it's not just the NGOs. It's up to all of us. It's interesting because, you know, humanity has reached a very interesting stage. And we've been told, you know, categorically that this is the first generation to feel the negative impacts of particularly climate change, but also the abuse of our environment. But this is the last generation that can take the necessary action to prevent it from becoming, wait for it.
Oh, that, Mr. Desmond, thank you very much. Of course, I've had to come back to us in the Abuja studios. We are pressed for time now. And very quickly, gentlemen, in a few seconds, whenever it's your turn to respond to this question, I would like you to take it. You've talked about coordination, information sharing. That has policy implications, obviously. Who should take the lead in seeking to coordinate the relevant agencies, geological survey, water, fire service, NEMA, and so on and so forth? Is it the Ministry of Science and Tech? Is it who, Office of the Secretary of the Government of the Federation, the Presidency? Who should coordinate this? First, Professor Walter, I was going to say Professor Walter Adano, Professor Emmanuel Adano.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the questions I've been asking myself. After this tremor in Abuja, this committee was set up. I didn't even know the composition of the committee. And then the report was submitted to the Minister of Science and Tech. So I couldn't imagine what is the relevance of the science and tech, particularly in tremors, earthquake activities. So personally, I cannot situate that in science and tech. Geological survey is here. It has been distended to be like a mining corporation. They have more activities to do than that. So personally, I don't know who is supposed to be the repository or where the repository of such information is. Personally, I don't know.
All right, but that's Uwebo, DJ, very briefly, 1 or 2 seconds. Who should coordinate?
Well, it depends on the thematic area we are talking about. For instance, if we are talking about geologically induced hazards, of course, it's the National Geological Service, just like in other climes.
No, we're talking about coordination, geological survey, water, NEMA, medicine. Professor Febo, very quickly, who should coordinate?
Actually, what happens is that there should be a national committee, coordinating committee set up, knowing the inability of agencies in Nigeria to work hand in hand without fighting for who is in charge. Such a coordinating team with people pulled from geological survey, from the relevant arms of this system. Even the NGOs should be situated maybe in the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation or Cabinet Office. But then, Geological Survey Agency always has a key role to play when it borders on geohazards.
All right, Professor Charles Ofegbo, as Director, Institute of Geosciences and Earth Resources at Natural State University in Kefi, thank you very much for being part of our conversation.
Thank you, sir.
We also would like to appreciate Professor Emmanuel Adanu, always a delight having you, Good Morning Nigeria, Executive Director, Natural Water Resources Institute in Kaduna.
Thank you.
Our thanks also to Dr. Onimode Bandele, Deputy Director, Search and Rescue of NEMA. Thanks a lot for being around.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to Alex Nwebo, DG Geological Survey Agency. Thank you for being with us. And from Lagos, we were joined by Mr. Desmond Majakodumi, an environmentalist. Always a delight you'll be with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Thank you for being with us. Unfortunately, we couldn't take comments from Mr. Engineer Uwaifo, who joined us from Benin. So that does it for us, Joy, for this conversation on threats of and response to natural disasters in Nigeria. As we now know from the experts, these are issues to worry about. It's on that note, we would like to thank you for tuning in. Good Morning Nigeria, of course, returns on Monday, same time at 7 o'clock in the morning. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. You'll have a lovely weekend. And until then, a wonderful day.
And I am Joy Usiagu. Thank you very much for joining us. Monday is yet another edition.